Austin, how are you doing?
Good, Dad. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to have one of my friends today, Austin. This is going to be fun. He's got a great story. Today, our journey takes us inside the heart and mind of one of college football's brightest offensive minds, innovator, QB developer, recruiter, teacher, and leader of men. But most importantly, my friend. This is a story about his passion, perseverance, faith, and legacy. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. Alongside me is my son, Austin. Today, we'd like to welcome Rob Spence as our guest to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. Welcome, Rob.
Oh, it's good to see you guys today. It's good to reacquaint ourselves here.
It's good. You and I are usually talk on the phone, so at least today we get to see our smiling faces, and we're excited about that. Well, Rob, we want to start back to when you were just a little kid growing up in Pelham, New York, and the Spence home. What would be one word that would describe your childhood?
Love, a lot of unconditional love from both mom and dad, and a relatively pretty common occurrence in our family was just to experience that love each and every day. My parents were both excellent parents. Mom and dad did their best to give us a really a stable family life up until a little bit later in my life. But growing up in our household was filled with a lot of the things that most people experience. I mean, it wasn't anything unusual. I got three brothers and sisters, and we I'm the oldest, and we're all pretty doggone close for the most part. Now, I would say my life took a turn when I was going into high school. My dad believed that the only thing he could do for me was leave me a great education, so he wanted to make sure that I got that education. I was the one in our family that actually went to a boarding school, and at the time where I was growing up, it was in the '60s, and I was in New York, and I was in a suburb of New York, and the high school was absolutely out of control at that moment in our life. So I did the boarding school thing, and ended up going to a really tiny little school in Middletown, Delaware, called St. Andrews. And I was literally 12 years old and going down there to live in eighth grade. And I spent the next 5 years of my life apart from my family, which is really unusual because at the boarding school, we went home. Yeah, you'd start the school year sometime late August, and then you'd go home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. And really that was it, and I was a three-sport athlete. So I really spent my life at the boarding school and then came home in the summers, which created a very unusual lifestyle for me, one of extreme loneliness at times when I went home. But I also, because of my nature, I got involved in athletics there, and I was a three-sport athlete, like I said. And I was fortunate enough to be coached by just an incredible guy by the name of Dennis Madigan that became kind of a mentor to me at the time, because you don't have your dad there and you don't have your mom around, which is so wild. And you really become extraordinarily independent right away. And that's what I would say would be very unique about my family is I knew they loved me, but to live life away and do life away from your family with a bunch of guys, and it was all boys school, was really an unusual experience. And I absolutely hated being away from my family, but I grew in so many different ways there. And this coach that coached me in football and wrestling, his name was, again, Dennis Madigan, was a phenomenal teacher of just things, basic fundamentals in football. Great wrestling coach, but he was just such a disciplinarian, and he just ingrained in me this work ethic, and really taught us that if you work really, really hard, you can compensate for lack of talent. And training was everything. Repetition taught me how to teach. Eventually I came to understand teaching and coaching by the way he defined it. So that was kind of unusual. And I wrestled for a nationally ranked team and played high school football at a very, very tiny high school. And really my love and passion was football, but I was a really superb wrestler and thought I was going to go to college and wrestle. And I went off to Lafayette, to wrestle actually to Lafayette College, and got hurt going into my senior season as a wrestler, and ended up not going where I thought I would go. Like a lot of prospects today, when you get hurt, my opportunities kind of dwindled, and ended up there. And then my parents got divorced, and that was a key thing in my lifetime. And that, coincidentally, just talking about my life at that moment, my life fell apart in a lot of different ways when I went off to college. I didn't know Christ. I wasn't following hard after God, but I started to bump into people that were very different than myself, that were very more. I was so sold out to sports. I'd say that was my God. And I so badly wanted to be successful in athletics. And, that was taken away from me for a very brief period of my life, completely taken away. I had a stress fracture in my lower back. I could do nothing but really run. And, I ended up training with the track team there. But this whole part of my life, my parents' divorce was very bad. And at that point, I'd known nothing but a kind of a common, normal family life, like 2-parent household. And as this is going on, I saw signs for Fellowship of Christian Athletes that appeared every day in the lunchroom. And I was like, what's that all about? And, I had been very interested in God. And I felt this draw to wanting to know God, but I never really experienced how to do that. And I started to meet some Christians. I went to church and all, but again, I didn't have any personal relationship with a creator, and didn't know anything about Jesus Christ. And gradually I heard the gospel over and over again in a very short period of time. And then on a Friday night at Lafayette sometime in October, I gave my life to Christ. Jesus always knew who Rob Spence was, but Rob Spence didn't know who Jesus was.
Amen.
That was a life-changing moment. And, you would expect at that moment as a young person, I'm probably 20 years old at the time, that everything would turn around for the better. But, it did not. I found myself getting really involved in Bible study and being drawn to the Word of God. But my family life just absolutely fell apart. My whole life fell apart because I had to leave school. My dad called and said, I can't help you with your financial aid at Lafayette. I'm not going to be able to help you next semester. I was so distraught with what was going on. My mom and dad were both going off the rails at that point. So what I knew as a normal family was just devastated, and all the brothers and sisters kind of rallied around each other. But we kind of also at the same time started to go our separate ways. And I ended up going back to New York, or Pelham, New York, where I grew up, and ended up at Iona College. And
tell us about your sister and brother, Rob. Yeah. Tell us about your siblings.
Yeah, well, over the course of time, especially at that time in our life, my sister kind of went off the rails just like I did. We started, she started to get involved with a lot of different things that probably weren't great. When I say that, I'm saying like our friends and our peer group became more important than anything at home.
Right.
My brother wanted to go to, he's a couple of years younger than me, and he wanted to go to the best medical school in the country. And he ended up going to Manhattanville College, and he ends up getting a doctorate in anatomy, but, taking a long, hard road to do that, over many, many, many years because of what went on. My youngest sister, was at like 8 years old at the time. Ruthie, grew up without her dad around. We all got used to operating by ourselves and being independent because all of a sudden we were in a survival mode. I mean, at one point, we were living off less than $25,000 a year with four of us and my mom. And we all, started to work to survive and go to school. So, Stan, my younger brother, Mary, Ruthie, we're all kind of going our separate ways. And that's what happens to families. So I know that firsthand. And, I'm starting to try to figure out, hey, Lord, I this relationship that I'd started to explore with Jesus, I'm like, this is getting harder and harder, not easier and easier. And, that but the whole experience, it was crazy because I started playing football again, which I wanted to do in college. And, at the transfer, there was no wrestling there. So I did what I love to do, is play football. And there I am, starting it as a player at a Division III school for my 3.5 years that I had left in college.
Mm.
Do you have a favorite childhood memory? Whether in high school or even younger than that.
That's a lot of great memories growing up. Before I went to the prep school, but probably my best memories would probably be, winning our state title in wrestling when I was in high school. I know we were such a small school. It was a small school in the state, and we won the state championship in Delaware. And I remember that night coming back on the bus, and we all came from all over the place. Our wrestling team, it was a great bunch of guys, best friends, and we got back, and the whole entire student body was there, and all the teachers. And it was like at midnight, and just going absolutely berserk. And those kind of moments, I'll always remember that. That was like just a huge moment in my lifetime. And then I would say the moments that I spent with my dad. My dad was my coach in both baseball, Little League Baseball, and Pop Warner. And
Yeah.
he was very, very good coach in his own right. Played lacrosse at University of Virginia. And all my memories with my dad, both on the baseball field and on the playing football for my dad, were just phenomenal up until I was left. And we were close. That's where we spent all our time together. And
Yeah.
going down to the Little League Baseball field and it's spending hours. My dad would take me out on Sundays and hit me about 200 ground balls. I played shortstop and second base, and I'd have bruises on my chest because he'd be banging away so much. And you're like, come on, we got to work on that backhand and that throw to second one more time. And he was fun, and he coached myself and my brother. And
do you have any memorable conversations with him?
There were so many of them because after the games, he was very hard. He was very, very, very hard on me in particular. And I think that had some ramifications later in life. I was always looking for his approval. He's so, it was hard to get hey, great job out of my dad, or hey, you played a hell of a game.
Yeah.
He'd always be the one to he'd sit there and he'd focus on hey, you should have let that last ball go and taken that walk, or I can remember in 7th grade playing Pop Warner and missing a block, and he'd be talking about, hey, come on now, you got to keep your head up and you got to hit them up better, and and he'd be talking about that on the way home. So he's a little bit more. He was a perfectionist, my father, and he was a worker. He taught a work ethic and he taught perseverance. And I know he was always, when it got really tough in any moment in a game and you fought through that and you could finish a game, whether it be you were going in extra innings and, it was coming down that last at bat. My dad was always like, that's when you got to be at your best. And that's when you got to have your best focus. And I just remember him just always talking about that. And not that he wouldn't be proud of you when you did well, but the compliments were far and few between.
That's that era.
And it's funny as I'm when I ended up the offensive coordinator at Clemson, and I think a couple of those years we had some of the top offenses in the entire nation, both Toledo and Clemson, and he would still sometimes he'd point to hey, Boise State, they were just a little bit better than you in the red zone. You might want to take a look at that film and see if you. Oh yeah, it is classic. I mean, I can still remember being written up in Street and Smith, and they identify 3 of the top coordinators in FBS football, and I was one of them. And it's hard to believe, but yeah. And my dad he would not say anything about that, but he would be like, hey, take a look at what offense, what they're doing on offense at Oklahoma. Because they're a little bit better than you. You might want to really study them. And I mean, the compliments were far and few between. And he's like, so I think that I was always, like a lot of young men, searching for the approval of their father. And, I know that I will say this, after my parents got divorced, there was a big hole in our life, and father gone, mom gone for a period of time, and I reconnected with my dad very much so later in life. But the holes are deep that that are left by those moments where you wish you could have connected better with your parents. And I think we all, as fathers,
Mm-hmm.
leave that. Nobody does that fathering thing or that parenting thing well, perfect. Let's just put it that way. But for the most part, I could tell you I love both my mom and my dad, and
Mm.
both my mom and dad came to know Christ later in life.
Mm.
And powerful, powerful stories, both of them in their own right. And my mom is still alive. My dad actually, we moved him to Chattanooga, and he died in 2000. It would have been 2014. He died when I was down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But my mom's still alive, and my mom and I are best friends, and we share our faith, and we share our faith story, and we talk about what God's teaching us almost on a weekly, daily basis. I mean, she's an awesome woman.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. So would you say your dad was probably your biggest hero growing up, or did you have someone else that you really looked up to? Or
That's a great question. I would not probably have put my dad as that guy. And I think a lot of that had to do with going off to prep school.
yeah, yeah,
I would say if you asked me during my 5 years at prep school who I wanted to please, it was that coach. It was
yeah,
Dennis Madigan. And
yeah,
he just and I'm going to tell you, it's probably one of the reasons that I went into coaching,
yeah,
because of his impact, both positive and both negative, on me. Because I still, I'll always remember how much time I spent with him, and I'll remember the long bus rides. We went to the national tournament as a sophomore. I went in to the national wrestling tournament, prep school tournament up at Lehigh, and there was probably four of us that went. We drove up in a little Volkswagen bus, and I slept on the floor the whole way to Lehigh from St. Andrews, and I was cutting weight and had to make the weight. It
oh,
was a one-time weigh in, and I remember cutting probably about 15, 16 pounds to get down to,
Oh,
I think it was 114. Like, it was ridiculous, crazy. And I remember that I'll never forget it. And I trained so hard all season. And he said, "Listen, I think you can win this thing if you go down to this weight class." And they didn't have any certification rules or anything there. And I was like, he killed me. I mean, he absolutely killed me. And I tore my cartilage right before the tournament, and they taped me up, and I wrestled, and I finished. I think I got to this semis or something like that. I mean, I did really well for where I was, but I'll never forget that, because I wrestled hurt. He let me
yeah,
wrestle hurt. And there's pain and there's struggle. My right knee is horrible because of the surgery that I got in college later, 4 years later, because of that. But he just drove me so hard, and yet I would do anything for him,
yeah,
because I wanted to please him. And I think that there's something both great about that experience, and something both, very bittersweet.
yeah,
And, I look at the impact that a coach can make on a player and on a human being. And I think about going back to my college, and when I got to my last year in college, and my parents had really, that my mom got remarried. The man she remarried is alive, and I consider my dad,
mm,
Mickey Splett. He was the athletic director at Pelham High School, and I was out of control. And here I am, a professing Christian, and I was in a very dark place going into my 5th year. And the man who kind of entered my life was my position coach in college. And, he was the one person, while my parents were doing their thing and where our family was falling apart, he grabbed me and he was like, "I love you.
mm,
He built me up. He gave me confidence that I could, really get out of where I was, and that I could be a little bit more than I was and should be."
mm,
And he kind of just really he accepted me, loved me. And it was the first coach that actually loved me for who I was and not what I could do.
mm. Wow.
And, he's still a mentor of mine. We talk probably once a month. His name is Pete Williams. And that I talk to the coaches all the time about that moment in my life, and I realize that in my narrative, that coach entering my life at that point was a gift from God. He may have saved my life. I have a lot of my very best friends, a lot of the guys in my wedding that ended up being at Iona College, they're doing very well, but there's another group of my friends that did not do well. I mean, one of my best friends dies of AIDS just a couple of years after college. And, it was a very sad story. And there's a bunch of that. I was living in a very difficult place in New York and New Shell. Much of my life, my friends were connected to New York City and the Bronx and the nightclubs and everything else going on. And it was just a bad time. And, I say there, for the grace of God go I. I'm very fortunate I lived through that in many respects, not to over dramatize that. But, I was so discouraged and depressed about so many things going on in my family, and not seeing a way out, not seeing an end to any of it, not knowing where my life's going to go. And my stepdad, who entered into my mom's life, again, a gift from God, he saved me in so many ways. He gave me my first job as a coach at Pelham High School, where he was AD, and he was a coach and a teacher. And I just started to hey, this is what really good teaching and coaching looks like. And that was my stepdad. And that was that coach who coached me in college.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. And I mean, God got a hold of me at just the right time. And, it's unbelievable the things that happened to me throughout my lifetime since that point. Like a year after I'm out of college and I'm in my first job, I'm teaching in the South Bronx at a school where nobody speaks English. And there I am I'm in a place called Fort Apache at a little tiny Catholic school. And I'm driving back into Westchester County to go coach. And I'm just having a blast. I'm just loving, I'm like, this is where I feel God's pleasure. When I'm in that classroom, when I'm on that field coaching, and they let me be the head coach of the JV football team at the high school, at the Pelham High School that my dad was the AD. And there I am teaching these fifth graders down in the South Bronx, and I'm doing that thing. And I'm just like, I mean, I was made for this. And I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I started to get into this coaching thing. And here I am. I'm like at the end of this first season of coaching, and I go in for a routine visit into the doctor, and he finds a lump in my testicle.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm like, no big deal. And he's checking me out, and he's like, it's a Thursday afternoon, and he's like, he turns white, and he looks at me, and I'll never forget it. He looks at me and he says, Mr. Spence, I'm about 100% sure you got testicular cancer right here. And he said, you got to go right now to go get this. He said, you got a huge lump in your left testicle. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? On Thursday night, I'm on the phone with Dr. Parks, who's the team doctor from the New York Mets, trying to talk me into getting surgery on Friday morning. On Friday morning, I'm in Roosevelt Hospital with the head of urology and my stepdad, because he's the one that took me down. He's the only one that could take me down there. On Friday night, I go back to see the nun that runs the school that I'm teaching at. Her name is Sister Joseph. I'll never forget her. She's one of the best teachers I've ever been around in my entire life, and loved Jesus. And I was scared out of my mind, and I was scheduled for surgery, on Saturday morning. And I went down to the rectory, and I went in. I'll never forget. She said, "What's wrong?" And I told her, I said, "I don't know where else to go, but I had to go. I had to come to see you." And so we walked into the back of the rectory, and it was dark. And we went back into there was like a pergola area, and we sat down. And I'll never forget it. We prayed, and she prayed for me, and I'm bawling my eyes out because I'm so scared. And Saturday morning, I go in, and they said, that the head of urology said to me, I'm 100% convinced we have to take your testicle. You got cancer. I'm 100%. And it ended up not being cancer, and I lost my testicle, but it was like an incredible moment in my life, because I will say to this day that I felt God's hand on my life like more than I ever have at that moment. And that was a life change. And that was one of those life changing moments, because in to go to this story, I am in recovery, and I'm in there in the hospital for like 4 days. And I was there over Thanksgiving. So I'm there Thanksgiving Day, and I'm watching on TV Iona Prep play Nurse Shell on the Thanksgiving Day Turkey Bowl. And I'm praying and I'm saying, Lord, someday I would love to coach at Iona Prep. That spring, I don't know anybody. I get a phone call from Fran McCabe, who ended up becoming the head coach at Iona Prep, and he offered me a chance to go coach there. 2 years from that day, that year that I went there, I became the head coach at Iona Prep at about 24 years old, the youngest head coach in the state of New York, and I spent 5 years there. And that was just, one of those unparalleled moments in my life to be able to say that I could do that. And I just felt like that God had his hand on me to be able to move me in that position at that time. And, those 5 years led into, 30 plus years of college coaching and a marriage, and I've been married for 37 years, and my wife, Susan, and I met when I was there at Iona Prep. And, and I just think of the ups, downs, the valleys, and the mountaintop experiences of coaching, but that beginning, and that, that like I just became, as I reflected on my life, I mean, God has like grabbed me and said, hey, this is where you need to be, and this is what you need to be. And I'm going to take you here. I'm going to take you there, but you're going to find people in front of you that I want you to communicate my love and my passion for them through what you do.
Wow. You've said a boatload. But the one thing I've got to go back to, because I didn't know this about you, that you're a wrestler and 114 pounds. Come on. You probably wouldn't be able to see if you stood sideways.
No, it's funny because as a sophomore, I wrestled like probably 124, but I was cutting weight to get there. And I believe I went down to, it was probably at that time 118 or something along those lines. My natural wrestling weight as a senior, when I was recruited out of college, was to wrestle like 100, and I was probably 138, and I would drop down from like 160 to 138. And, that's what we did in those days. And I mean, I'm telling you, like I might gain 10 pounds after a one-time weigh-in.
Yeah.
We were a machine. Where I went, you fit into wherever coach told you to fit into the weight class.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea of like how much I grew, I went from 155 pounds normal natural weight, like as a freshman in college. And that's not what I wanted to be, but I had to hold it to where I played college football at 200, a little over 200 pounds. I was just a shade under 6 foot by the time, that I was finished maturing.
That's amazing.
And I was a weight room warrior. I mean, I spent like these guys. I was 5-6 days a week in the weight room and loved training.
What were you? What were you as a football player? Were you a quarterback or?
No. I played inside receiver in a triple option.
Okay.
We were a triple option team. I played for Tony DeMeo, who's still alive, great football coach, who you guys know. I played for Brian Cleary, who took over for him when he left. But we were triple option. We would throw the ball probably anywhere. When we were rolling, we'd throw it maybe 12 times a game, 12 times a game. I was leading receiver my senior year. I think I had 12 catches, and I got hurt this game. So just give you an idea how little we threw the ball, which is hilarious.
Well, let's jump. I'm going to jump to your coaching career, and we've broke it up into about 3 segments here, Rob. And the first is, if you wouldn't mind, for our listeners, I'd like you to describe your journey, include some mentors in there, from your first, which you sort of already done, your first high school job to the time you finish up at Toledo. So from first job to Toledo, describe your journey and some of the mentors.
Well, I think the first thing is I was a high school coach, and I did that for 7 years. 5 years as a head coach, and a very young head coach. So I was learning football on the run and experiencing both success and failure, both at a high rate, I might add, doing both. And once I got excited about this, I was like, I want to do this for a living. So one of my mentors was my stepfather,
Yeah.
Mickey Split. I mean, without question, and he's one of the best coaches I've ever met. Still alive. We still talk football all the time. Definitely one of them. Um, I, I know that I spent 5 years trying to find a job in college football. I was just 5 years as a head coach. Every year I was like, I wanted a GA job. I wanted this, I wanted that, but I couldn't find the right fit. And I was getting pretty discouraged because I was 29 years old and wanted to coach in college, and I hadn't found that right job. And I just got married, and I went to I still graphically remember going down to Columbia's campus, interviewing, being one of 5 guys to interview for a receiver job, and Ray Tellier was head coach, and I begged him to interview me, and I had a terrible interview, by the way, didn't give me the job. And then out of the blue, 6 weeks later, one of my friends said, "Hey, call Coach Joe Gardy at Hofstra. They still haven't found an offensive coordinator." And I'd been at Iona College at that point, being a coordinator, making $3,000 part time. And I was like, no way. He's not going to hire me. He doesn't even know who I am. So I call him up. It's on a Saturday afternoon. He answers the phone, and he's like, talks to me like 5 minutes. He says, "Come on in. I'll interview you on Monday." So I go in there on Monday afternoon, and Wednesday I got my first full-time job 6 weeks later. And it was like breakthrough moment in my life. And again, never should have happened. And, we probably the best offense I've ever coached in my entire career was that year. We were number one in the country and everything, and Division III, and it was a blast. And then I went on to Holy Cross, and that was Mark Duffner was there at the time. And we were riding the heels of a big time win streak. And, we were 20-0, and then he got the job at University of Maryland, and I went to University of Maryland with him for 5 years, and ended up being with him as long as I've been with any head coach, a total of 6 years, and ended up being a quarterback coach there. And from there, I had many opportunities from there. I went back to Hofstra, believe it or not, and then was there for 3 years, and that's where we developed Gio Carmazzi. We were FCS at that time and became an elite FCS team. And I would say one of the people that impacted me the most was Joe Gardy, who had been an NFL coach and who hired me the first time and then rehired me back the second time. And, he was one of the best evaluators of talent. And he was just, again, one of those guys that you just never forget because he's a character. He was fun to coach with, and he let you coach. And he never told you what to do, but he just gave you like all the reins to do whatever you needed to do, and gave you the format, and you had to do it, and you were responsible for the outcome. And I kind of love that model as a coach, give it to me and let me run with it.
Right.
And I got, the opportunity to go down to Louisiana Tech from there. And I coached Luke McCown, an freshman All-American at Louisiana Tech. A great experience because, we're coaching against the top teams in the country there because we needed money. So if our motto was, if you pay us, we will play you. It didn't matter who.
I remember that.
Right. And we played like top 10 Auburn, Penn State when they were top 10, Auburn top 10. We played University of Miami, number one in the country that year, played Kansas State. They were in top 5. And then we played like our conference schedule, so it was hilarious. We're going into the Miami Orange Bowl with a freshman quarterback who probably might hold the passing record still this day in the old Orange Bowl. Luke McCown threw for like 425 against U of M. From there, we're 4-8 that year, by the way. And I'm like, I was like, what did I do? And from there, I got, believe it or not, this is how God works. I'm sitting in a gymnasium in Independence, Louisiana, at a high school, watching a kid who I'm going to offer a guard play basketball. And I get a call from Utah, and they offer me the offensive coordinator's job. I met this coach long ago. And then I ended up, taking the job, and I'm literally like a week away from going to Utah, and Coach Amstutz, who I don't know, calls me out of the blue. Now, remember, we're 4-8.
Right.
We're pretty good on offense, but no, we're still 4-8. And then out of the blue, I get this call from this guy, Tom Amstutz at Toledo. And he's like begging me to come just look at the job. So I had to go drive to Green Bay from Louisiana for my wife's family because we weren't in a bowl game. I thought I'm going to Utah, and he keeps calling. And I'm like, maybe I should just go look at this. And it wasn't in my nature to go do something like that. It's because I was committed to go take the shot. So he finally says, listen, I think this is something really special. I'm going to fly you out here. You're in Green Bay, Toledo, just come. So I fly in there. He says it never really snows much in Toledo.
Yeah.
You know that, right? Get snowed in, meet him the whole day, get snowed in, have to spend the night over there. But something about Coach Amstutz in Toledo, I was like, this is family, this is home. And I ended up staying there for 4 years. I took that job instead of that. And, we ended up being unbelievable. And I'd say Tom Amstutz, the head coach there, he was the first Christian head coach, really, sold out to Jesus head football coach. And I started to see how I could both love a player and hold them accountable. And I could coach with more meaning and more significance. And I started to understand how to do that. And God was teaching me, through this journey, how to put him first and also love my players and let him handle the outcome.
Well, I got to say to you, thanks to you, I had a chance to be there 1 year with Coach Stutz as well. And you're exactly right. The picture I have of Coach Stutz, Rob, is, I don't know if he did it when he was with you guys, but he used to cook on Friday out on that deck at Toledo. He'd cook fish for the coaches. And just, if you know Stutz, he'd love to eat. He'd have you over his house. He was an unbelievable person, as you said. And, one of the things that people probably don't know about you, and I don't know exactly when you started, but you're an avid runner. And I think at that time at Toledo, didn't you run in the Boston Marathon?
Yeah, Coach, Coach Amstutz is a funny guy. So I my hobby was running road races. When the season was over, I would train and peak for a race in the spring all the time. So that was my hobby. I loved something I could fit into coaching. And so I'd gotten better and better and better. And I'd started to, compete at a much higher level. And I qualified for the Boston Marathon at Notre Dame Marathon. So it was in my last season with them. So I told him, hey, Coach, I qualified for Boston, but I can't go. We got our spring game that weekend. So a couple of days went by, and he pulled me in the office, and he says, this is once in a lifetime opportunity for you. We are going to move the spring game so you can go compete in the Boston Marathon.
Awesome.
So he lets me go compete. We moved the spring game, and I run the marathon. I run like a 3:11, and my last 2 miles in the marathon are like 6:22s.
Wow.
And I run the best race I've ever run, like 3:11 for 47 at the time. Pretty good time, top 1,000 my age group and everything. Really good. But it's hilarious. Like, I have my chip in, you give you, and our whole staff is following my race, the entire staff, the whole time. And they're like, I get all the texts after the race, and it was hilarious. I mean, what a great guy, because he could both balance life and we could win.
Yes.
And we could take care of our players. And it was just a great balance and a great family atmosphere there. And then of course I went to Clemson, and, I worked for Tommy Bowden there. And that was, I would say, just watch out what you wish for. Like I had always dreamed of doing that. And I knew at some point I would have an opportunity. But it's funny how God takes, at Clemson, he's taken something that is so, in my life, that was a dream that I had reached, that pinnacle of like the coaching profession as a coordinator at that age. But it's funny, because with that experience, there were so many mountaintop experiences at Clemson and so many valleys, and the valleys are very deep and sometimes really dark. And as I told my family, I remember telling the girls, I said, life as you know it is going to change if I say yes to this. Mm-hmm. And that was a fact. Mm-hmm. And, my words are very prophetic, because the 4 years included many opportunities to leave there for great, quote unquote, great jobs, for great coaches and great programs. And I stayed. And, that proved not to be the best thing. And for me, in terms of what the world would say in the career. And, you know, I, um, I still remember like the first year I took over, we were the worst offense in the ACC when I got there. And we became one of the very best, We set over 77 school records while I was there, prolific offenses. But the first year I was there, I remember losing to Georgia Tech and coming home that night, and the girls had come to the game, and we got home, and there was a for sale sign in our front yard.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls were, Sammy was crying. The older one got it. The younger one, Sydney, was like, "Dad, are we selling our house?" And I'm like, "Well, Sydney, not quite working like that right now. That's not really there on for the right reason." So I had to try to explain to him, like, this is a zero-sum game at a place like this. It's win or get fired.
Yeah.
And that's
Rob, for our listeners, and again, we both have been through scenarios like this. How did this moment at Clemson, when you get let go after all these great years, how did it challenge and strengthen your faith? And what were maybe some of your conversations with Papa when this was going on?
That's a great question. I will never forget. I got fired 4 years into my stay there. And I got fired on October 13th. And it was in 2009. And my girls will remember that day forever. Mm. They found out I was getting fired before I knew it. Mm. They were at Daniel High School. And the rumors were going around. We were 3-3. And I didn't have all my best players. We had just lost to Wake Forest. At Wake Forest, I didn't have Jacoby Ford. I didn't have C.J. Spiller. I didn't have James Davis. I could go on and on. We had a rash of injuries. We were 3-3. And Tommy Bowden had just signed a contract to stay. I had signed a 3-year contract to stay. I had turned down the opportunities to go to many, many different really good schools. Why move again? I didn't want to move my family. And I was in the driveway after a couple weeks afterwards, and it's football season. I'm like, don't have a job to go to. I'm sitting in Clemson midway through the season without a job. And I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And I was devastated from my whole psyche, everything. I'm like, Lord, you took me this far for this? Hmm. And I remember breaking down. I remember reading in Peter, where Peter talks about the joy of the trial. And why are you surprised about these fiery trials? And I just remember those words coming into my mind and my spirit, and recognizing that I'm in that fiery trial right now. And why would I be surprised? But I was literally crying in the driveway in the Suburban. Family had just gotten out of the car to go after church one day. And I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to? And I started to realize how much of my identity and how much of myself was formed around this idea of being, like, my nickname was the mad scientist at the time. And that was like, I kind of bought into the whole thing, which is not good. And I laughed. I had fun with it, but I wasn't that guy anymore. And I wasn't that guy that they wrote about in Street and Smith. I was fired. I was out of work. I was, again, that had never happened to me. And I started to really, God, the Father, Abba, took me through this time, this valley where I had to rediscover my identity and who I really am in Jesus Christ and what my worth really is. And that was really great when you're winning and going to big bowl games and everybody sees that symbol, that paw. And I remember flying into high schools on a jet or whatever to go recruiting in the spring, and it'd be me and the pilot, and I go 4 schools in 6 hours and fly wherever I want. Like that. I'd walk into school here in Virginia to go get a tailback, and they'd have a welcome Coach Spence on. I mean, come on, that's not real life. And I was, again, wondering who I am. And I started to rediscover how much God loved me, even though I don't have work. I realized how much I needed God and how much I needed Jesus. And I also realized that there's way more important things than what I spent most of my life doing. And from that point on, I really started to understand, I have a responsibility to the people that I coach. And wherever God places me, he calls me to speak for him. And he may have another place for me to go. And that's what I started to recognize. And then I would say, like at that moment in time, I started to aggressively look for other jobs, probably too aggressively, because I wanted to dive right back into it. And I wasn't ready to do that. Mm. Not by any estimation was I, because I wasn't right. For a long time, I wasn't right, and I was in a dark place, and but yet I started to understand, hey, God's doing something, and I'm not sure what it is. I was offered a job at Syracuse, and we're one of the, probably one of the worst teams ranked in major college football at the time. I took the job. I knew Coach Marone, who was coming from the Saints, who had played at Syracuse, and we'd been friends for 20 years. And I went there, and Susan and I got involved in starting a Fellowship of Christian Athletes huddle that didn't exist. And they have one of the biggest huddles, FCA huddles now, in all of college football. And, I look at that, and by the way, let me share this incredible part of our story. I go up to Syracuse. I'm not overly excited about the culture and what I chose to do. Coach Bowden said he's getting back into it. I had a contract, a good contract, and I didn't sign it. I had a huge buyout. I wouldn't sign my contract. I coached there without a contract, and I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. I was getting paid, but I didn't sign that big contract because the buyout was huge. And my agent at the time was Nathan Whitaker, who happens to represent Tony Dungy. He said, don't worry about it. I got fired. Last game on a Sunday morning. And we had turned the offense around there. And I got fired on Sunday morning a year after the Clemson experience. And you talk about having to reboot. And this time is even harder. And there's all sorts of things I could sit here and tell you on this podcast, but I'm not going to lie to you. That's not a good spot for your two girls and your wife. And so here it is back, here it is, a year after Clemson. And now it's even harder. And I'm like, Lord, I've done everything you've asked me to do. And we improved. We did pretty well on offense. I mean, we killed Rutgers that year at the end. I had a quarterback who never played college football, Greg Paulus, who transferred to play as a kind of a stunt, if you will. He had 1 year eligibility. He was a point guard for Duke for 4 years. And we got him ready to go. And he played in our first game against University of Minnesota. And he still had set records, passing records, that it might still exist up at Syracuse in the 1 year. So we did some pretty good things. But I'm out of work again. And, I say that to tell you, like, you don't know what God has in store and how he can take those kind of things and use them for his good. And I had to keep reminding myself, and as I started to move on this journey, that my yes to Jesus is yes to him and no to me. And I started to understand what that truly meant, is that I was submitting to what the Lord wanted for my life at that point in time. Like, I'd like to tell you that it was a great experience from there, but from there I went to Temple. And now here's where it gets really crazy. I go to Temple. I have an opportunity to go interview for a Division II head coaching job. My wife's not interested. I didn't get the other jobs. And all of a sudden, this Temple thing opens up, and I end up going to Temple to be on their staff. And, of course, Coach Golden is there, and we have a really good football team. And he said, you're going to take over the receiver position, and they're a real problem. They ended up playing great. I coached Rod Streeter. He ended up playing the NFL a number of years. I had a great position group, and we ended up being a strength of our team. He gets a job in Miami. He doesn't bring me. He doesn't bring Matt Rule. He doesn't bring almost all of us on offense. So out of work again. Right. So the journey's getting even more interesting. And I get offered the offensive coordinator job at Buffalo, and the girls, no one wants to go back to New York because of Syracuse. So I'm like, I turned it down without a job, thinking, trusting God, he's got a place. And then that's how I ended up at Bethune-Cookman a month or two later at the experience down in Florida. And that's Sydney, my youngest daughter. That's her fourth school in 4 years.
Wow.
And that's where the family part, of coaching, you really got to weigh how hard it is on your family. But God, through it all, little by little, I'm starting to learn more and more about like every one of those stops. Like I'm meeting more people as a result. I'm introducing more and more people to Christ. And I'm also experiencing the valley where life is really lived. And I'm learning how to take joy in pretty simple things and be thankful for the day that I have. And I also started to understand that, a lot of life is about sometimes what it's like for people to just survive, and that's what it became in our family. A lot of times it became, hey, we got to make it through today. When you're the contract, you don't have a contract. You're, for the first time in my life, I was on unemployment, at some point. And here I am. I'm going from being able to write a check for my girls' education in college to going into where they're Pell Grant qualifiers, and we're looking at estimated family contribution and all those things. Like I'm in another world. All I can tell you is like God has a way of humbling all of us. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And all the good things that God brings out of some of those, what we call tragedies, and the perspective that he brings to one's life, it just changes you. And, as I look and I reflect back, like I can understand how your character changes. I see how God uses things to change the soul of a man and the interior of a man, if he'll allow him to do that. And he keeps breaking you sometimes until you are willing to let go. And I think that was part of my story, and that's a very big part of my story. And
First of all, thank you for sharing that in depth, Rob, because that's going to speak to lots of people. Boy, I resonated with a lot of things you said, and I know Austin can think of the days that his dad was crying in the driveway. And let me interrupt you for a moment. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have to do this podcast with my son, Austin. For the last 10 years, Austin and I have had many intimate conversations on his drive home from work. Some of these father-son conversations have been lighthearted, while others have been very deep and emotional. Over the Christmas holidays, we decided to start a podcast called Awaken Kingdom Culture, where we invite our friends to share their life-changing stories with you, our listeners. This podcast is done under our nonprofit, The Win Awakening, a sports ministry network for coaches, athletes, and those who lead. Our vision is to awaken hearts and minds, one story at a time. Our mission is to encourage coaches and athletes and those who lead to live from a place of victory, regardless of success, records, or the scoreboard. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. Right in the middle of your mess, I'm reminded daily that the most important person of my day is the one in front of me, and that one matters, and that you are the one. WinAwakening.org is our website. I encourage you to visit our website, where you can encounter the good news of who you are in Christ and what you already possess and how to live from it. There you'll find blogs, videos, Andrew's journal, and this podcast. Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. I'm thankful for all of you who have given and are a member of Team Win. Awaken Kingdom Culture is listener supported. And if you'd like to support us, you can go to winawakening.org. We are a nonprofit. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And please like, share, and write a review on Spotify or YouTube. Okay, it's time to get back to the podcast.
Yep.
Let's jump to Georgetown, your present situation. And I know Austin asked some questions for you.
Yeah. So going through your career, how has this helped shape your coaching philosophy? What would you say your coaching philosophy is, from the mentors you had to maybe the ups and downs in your career? How has that kind of shaped your belief system and how you go about coaching on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think that I want to represent Christ.
Mm.
I think the most important thing I can do is make sure that I love the people that he puts in front of me.
Yeah.
And I love the coaches and I love the athlete. And to go from a life where it's all transactional to a life where I want to be transformational.
Mm.
And I know that I have the hope of Christ and that I have the promises of Christ. And I want to share that as I coach. And I want to reflect that as I do what I do. And I want the athlete to understand his value.
Mm.
And I want them to see that they're made in God's image. And I want to coach like they're made in God's image. And that's a lofty goal in a world where, you're judged on winning and losing.
Yeah.
And I think that I want, at this stage of life, what I learned is about the relationship. When people ask me how I coach, first to say I coach their heart.
Mm.
I want to coach the heart because I think that Jesus, he spoke to the heart of a man. And,
Yes.
It says in Samuel that man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the inward heart. And, that I think that that's where Jesus looks at who you are and what your worth is based on what God says your worth is. And that's how my coaching has changed over the years. And I think that the Georgetown experience here has been of such great value because I've been able to, for the first time in my life, I've been able to coach a true student athlete.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to do the Ignatian retreat during COVID, which was an experience like no other, where I spent a year of my life, about 10 months actually, of an hour of prayer every day and Bible study. And then you reflect weekly with a confidant who takes you through this journey of the Ignatian retreat, a journey of prayer and scripture reading and meditation. And that was a life-changing experience. And I came out of that really wanting to be different and wanted to finish well. And that's the way I would describe what I'm doing right now is I want to finish well.
Mm.
So much of our coaching life, and I look back, I'm very hard, very harsh, very, 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 very tough on my players.
Yeah.
Because that's the way I was coached.
Mm.
And much like I told you about my dad was a perfectionist. I was like that. And I took no joy in games where we weren't phenomenal in terms of the stats and, the percentages of what they told me in the numbers and the analytics, and so much of my early life in coaching at the very pinnacle of my coaching career, I wasn't happy. I wasn't filled with the joy. And I just take so much joy in the relational part of what I'm doing right now. And yet at the same time, I can also tell you that it's from the coaching analytic schematic part. I spent so much time doing it, and I still love doing that. But that's not who I am.
Mm.
And that's not what I want my players and my coaches to reflect back on. I want them to know the name of Christ, the name of Jesus. They're going to forget Coach Spence. I don't want them ever to forget the name of Christ. And I want, if I could pray anything for my players, that they would come to know who that Jesus Christ is in an intimate, personal way, and that they could know how to relate to him and how he wants to relate to them on a day-by-day basis. And most recently, like in the last couple of months, I've been very impacted by the idea that God is my Father and the friendship that God wants to have with his followers.
Amen.
And I think I was profoundly struck by that when I watched that documentary, Show Me the Father, that I would recommend to anybody. And I started to see the depth of the love that God has for us.
Amen.
And the depth of love that God has for me, even when I'm in my worst place. And I wish I'd known that. If I could go back and do my life over again, it would be able to walk with Jesus Christ on a daily basis, and to be able to be more joyful about the gifts and the many gifts that he gives us, and to relinquish control of my life and let him have his way with my life. And I think that in doing so, that there's so much freedom and so much joy, and you will find that you will do your best coaching when you can be free from the expectations of other people and the expectations of the world, because we are prisoners as coaches to a world, whether we know it or not. We are prisoners, and Jesus talks a lot about, and the scriptures have much to say about being a prisoner of sin or a slave to sin, or a prisoner of an expectation that isn't healthy. And I grew up like that from a father who had those kind of expectations, and then lived in a world that had those expectations, and it nearly destroyed me. And I look back, and right now the last 5 years of my life, most especially, have been years that I've grown in that joy, and I've wanted to be able to share that joy more, with everybody I come in contact with.
The love of Papa. I love it. I love it. So, Rob, you've mentioned each one of them already quickly, but let's talk about family a little bit. Tell us about your wife and your children.
Well, Susan and I met back at Iona Prep. We've been married going on with our 37 years now.
Wow.
And, I love my wife. She is an absolutely spectacular human being. I'm so proud of her. She put out so much of her life to invest in my life and our children. And she did what a coach's wife always, what a coach's wife does on many occasions. She sacrificed. When we first met, the first time I met her, we laughed like you can't believe it. I met her on a Thursday night at a local bistro by us, and we just got to talking. It was hilarious. I mean, we're sharing stories, and she's telling me about how her dad coaches basketball, and I'm telling her, well, yeah, I coach football. And she looks me square in the eye and she says, "There is no way I will ever marry a coach after watching what my dad." I start laughing like, who is this girl? Right? So we dated a little bit, and then I found out she lied to me about her age. So I broke it off. She was like 20 years old, 19 years old, and I'm like 26, 27. She probably, I'm like, come on, you got to be kidding me, right? So we grew to be really good friends. I'd see her out all the time, and we just kind of lived my life. But I kept seeing her out, and we kind of I'd go hang out and talk to her, and we went on another date right before she left to leave New York to go to college. She's going to go back to college. She wasn't going to college this time. She's working in a bank, and I took her out for her birthday, and I realized after knowing her for 6 months, I had fallen in love with her, and She's ready to leave. She's getting in the car next day to go back out to Wisconsin, where she's from, going to Arizona. That's where she's going to go to school. And she leaves the next day, and I go over to my house, talk to my mom and my stepdad, and I'm like, I think I just fell in love with this girl. I don't even know where she lives. I don't really know where she's going. It is true. It's unbelievable. So I find out where her family camp is that her parents run. And I track the number down. This is the era before like cell phones and everything else. And I call her that night and I said, Susan, you want to get married? She says, oh, yeah. So we ended up getting married like a couple months later. And we've been married 37 years since. And, she's an interior designer for Ethan Allen here in Washington, D.C. And she wanted to be a designer her whole entire life. And this is a great message. This is an unbelievable part of our life. We had never lived apart during our coaching journey, and our rule of the family was, when we move, we all move. If we can't move together, we don't move. And there's 1 year exception to that. So I come to Georgetown, and she comes up here begrudgingly. I'm going to tell you right now. She's not too excited about college football or anything, and you can't blame her. She cannot blame her. Cannot blame the woman. We had moved 23 times in like 30 some odd years. And so she comes up here and she's working in a little design shop here, Pottery Barn. She's part-time. And this lady, the manager from Ethan Allen, a big company here, she watches my wife work for a couple of weeks. She comes in and said, hey, would you like to make some real money and come work for a real store? And my wife takes a job. She's like, my wife is an interior designer. That's like, she's loved to do that. She had been an architecture major at Louisiana Tech, and she's she's a 4.0 student now. But we keep moving. She can't graduate from college. Right. But she's made more homes because of what we do, because we move so much. She knows how to make a home right. And she's at Ethan Allen, and wouldn't you know it, 2 years ago, she wins 2 awards in a global company, #1 in the entire company for 2 designs. And she wins 2 #1 awards in this company that's a global company. And she is one of their top people in the entire world for Ethan Allen. Like, she's in top 20 in the years that she's been there. And I can see a dream came to fruition for her that she put off, and there's God working again.
Yeah.
And my wife did things without any expectation that anything like that would ever happen in her lifetime. And that in itself, and that's been such a blessing for me as her husband to watch that and see that happen in her life. And I'm going to tell you right now, I wish I could tell you that it's all been like perfect here, because it hasn't been. I mean, we live in a 1-bedroom apartment that's 650 square feet because it's Washington, D.C. And, it's hard. And, we still own a house somewhere, and the girls, one's in Washington, and that Sammy's in Washington, the state of Washington, married, living on the side of a mountain in a house with her husband, who's an engineer, but we don't see him. And we love him. We talk to him all the time. And Sydney, my youngest daughter, Sydney Ray, is living in Asheville, North Carolina, and she's dating a fireman down there in this very serious relationship. So I don't know where that's going to go, but those 2 girls of mine are just precious, unbelievably precious daughters. And I was laughing about telling the coaches here, the story about Sammy being born and just barely making the birth of my firstborn, because I'm out recruiting at University of Maryland and having to drive my tail off for 4 hours to get to the hospital because my wife went into labor. And, it's the coach's life. But, my wife is she's an absolute warrior. The 2 girls are hilarious. They're like characters. They're not without their scars because of what their dad did. And I was just telling the coaches, I said, I'm thankful to say they still love their dad, but they had to show a lot of grace. They need a lot of grace to live with Coach Spence. Let me just share that with you.
You relate to that, Austin.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of grace.
Well, let's talk legacy. It's our last chapter here, and When I listen to you talk, Rob, I just am thinking of my wife and what she has said to me many times when I'd leave the house. And I see this in your story, that coaching is a high calling.
Yes.
And I think of some of the other guests that we've had, and they have said the same thing. You just don't know which voice of a coach
Right.
is going to touch a life that's going to be changed forever.
Right.
And so, I just am so encouraged as we hear you share. But a couple last things as we close. Knowing what you know now, is there anything you'd have done differently, either professionally or personally?
I think one thing I would do differently is what I stated before. I would have taken more joy in the journey, and I would not have been in a rush. I would have allowed the circumstances that I'm in, I would have allowed them to speak to me more clearly and know that God speaks to us through those circumstances. And I would have listened more carefully to him and been in a lot less of a rush. And I would have taken more joy in the moments that I had and the blessings that I had. And I should never have looked ahead as much as I did and wanted to go as fast as I did. And I think that my message to the coaches here on a daily basis is, wherever God puts you, find everything you can to take joy in the moments that you're given and the life that you have in front of you right there. I would say that would be my greatest advice. Is in the world I'm living in now, it's such a fast-paced world for these younger coaches, and I always tell them that it is not who you know, if you know the creator of the universe.
Wow.
He knows people you don't know. And he will put you in touch with who he wants to put you in touch with at just the appropriate time. And that phone will ring when you least expect it, instead of you trying to make it ring.
Wow.
And I just think that when you trust yourself to the creator, you are where he wants you to be. He engineers every single circumstance in your life, from the beginning to the end.
Well said.
That is so wise. I mean, literally the next question is, over all your experiences, what wisdom do you have for coaches of the next generation? And you just answered it. And
Yes.
and I literally sit here and say, like, there is that lie out there that it is who you know, especially in this coaching profession.
Right.
And you're constantly almost like chasing and trying to get hooked up, or performing for other people so that they like you. And but what you just said is what Dad and I are starting to figure out through this ministry is, it isn't about who you know. It's about the one that you know, who is the great connector. And as we're sitting here on these podcasts and we're seeing all these connections made, and we're like, how are we talking to this person today? Or how are we getting part of this story? I mean, it's him. It's him. And that wisdom, for myself and other young coaches, I mean, of course, we're going to be foolish and overlook it, because that happens all the time. But, that was so wise.
I when I left Rutgers, we were at Rutgers, and we were there 2 years, and we had really good team my first year there. I mean, lost 15 to the NFL, and then came back, and we went 6-6, and we were going to the Pinstripe Bowl, and the head coach there fired the whole offense. And my wife was like at the end of her rope, and she was like, let's go back to high school. And I took the job in Tennessee, Chattanooga, at a Chattanooga Christian. I was coaching high school football, and I wanted to fall off the end of the earth and not even, I literally taught nobody in coaching, college coaching, like totally done. And I was at that high school coaching a little school that never won. And I was coaching these little, like my guard was like 160 pounds. And, I mean, I'm at a Region 3 high school in Tennessee. And those 2 years, God reacquainted me before I went back. He said, this is why you coach.
Wow.
You are in front of who I want you in front of right now. And I went back to a wedding in Chattanooga this summer. My first team at Chattanooga Christian, Barrett Bickley, he went into the Marines. I had 4 guys on that team go into the armed forces, the military, for a career. I would have never expected one of them. One of them, Jared Miller, who's at Quantico right now. He said to me at the wedding, he said, Coach, I still think of when I train my guys, when I'm training them in boot camp, I still think of you telling us not to lean over in those sprints because you will show weakness to your opponent. And he said but he was talking about also you could relate what we were doing to God's word on a daily basis too. And I was realizing God put me in their life for a reason. And I'm sitting there. These men are men today in part because they know Jesus Christ, and it makes them who they are supposed to be. And I never anticipated I'd go back and coach high school football, but here the impact that the coach can have, and they never know. And and my wife was sitting there at the table, and she's listening to a parent come over and talk to me about her son and the moment that I had with her son that I never remembered, but it was just building a kid up at a particular time. And he never forgot that. And that's,
Rob,
the last thing I'll say is this: our words
yes,
are life and death.
Yes.
and the words of my father when I was growing up, they were life and death at that time. Yes. The words of Dennis Madigan, who coached me, were life and death. And too many times they were speaking death into my life. And as a coach, our words are that. And that's why we have to measure our words, and our soul has to be right. And we have to be right when we're before the audience that God puts us before on that moment, in that day, at that time. And
words matter. Words matter.
They matter. And that, I guess that, that's it for me in this present age, exactly what you just said. You just don't know who you're going to touch. Don't worry about what the world's seeing, and they're seeing a whole different world than you're seeing, but we're still thinking so much about what it looks like on social media.
Yeah.
And what
Rob, when you think of all that you've accomplished, what do you value and treasure the most?
The relationships with the coaches and the players. Mm-hmm. And mostly the relationships with the players.
Yeah.
And that is after doing this for 43 years, that when you can touch another human being and you can make that connection and show them that love of Christ, that's unparalleled. There's no greater gift that you're going to give anybody during this experience that you have.
Coach, what has been maybe the most significant moment in your coaching career and spiritual journey?
I think it was probably back in it would have been 1994 when I went to Promise Keepers at University of Maryland. Clyde Christensen, I was came to know, one of my best friends at University of Maryland. He was who was a mentor to me from a Christian standpoint. He was the Paul in my life. And he convinced me. I started to go back to church, when I was at University of Maryland, and I started to really think God was kind of just tugging at me, and I think when I had committed my life to Christ when I was at Lafayette, and here this journey's going on, and I kind of lost sight of that a little bit early on, and we got fired at Maryland after 5 years, and but that moment when I went to that conference and I recommitted and I said yes to Christ, and it was because I had a man in my life that kept tugging at me to, hey, we go on runs, and he would start talking about, hey, what are you thinking about? What's God doing in your life? And I'm looked at him I'm thinking, not as much as he should be, because I'm not letting him. And I think that moment where I recommitted my life to Christ, and and again, I didn't even know really what it looked like to be getting into the scriptures every day. And I watched him do it. And then I started to do it. I mean, like I tell you right now, that man in my life and that recommittal, and then going back and starting to try to live that out in a family. I can still remember how nervous I was when we were back at Hofstra and my girls were young. And I was like, let me try this prayer thing in front of my entire family and getting down like on my knees with my girls when they were young and saying, let's pray. I was like, holy cow. I mean, I can even almost cry thinking about it right now because I was so scared. But I was like, that turned into something else. And that grows, and that seed grows, and that faith grows with other men and believers in your life. Mm. And, I want to be that to somebody else. And I want somebody else to be that to somebody else, to understand the value of that. And when you give the gift of the gospel to somebody, you are giving the gift of eternity. What is a greater gift? I mean, if you could give away your anxiety and some of it, at least some of it, like what greater gift than to say, hey, Lord, you've got this. I can't handle this. Things are falling apart all around me. All hell's breaking loose. Like David says, 1,000 have fallen at my side. The heavens are quaking in our coaching world. What can I hang on to right now? And that's what I was learning throughout this whole journey. And God never
Rob,
said it never said it's going to be easy in that book that we read. There's no such thing as easy in that book.
When someone encounters Rob Spence, what do you want them to experience, and how do you want to be remembered?
I want them to see somebody that was authentically living out a relationship with Jesus. I want to be remembered as not being perfect, but somebody who tried to love the people in front of them. Mm-hmm. I want them to remember somebody that was a giver and not a taker. I want them to remember somebody that poured themselves out for the people that he coached and he coached with, and that he loved well, and that he was passionate about sharing the gospel and about sharing life with Christ and living with Christ.
Well said. One of my favorite parts is when we end here, Rob, and we call it final words. And I want to give you a chance that if there's something we didn't ask that you wanted to share, or just anything that's on your heart to talk to our listeners. And when you're done, Austin's going to say something to you, and then I'll say something and close us.
Just to be open, to open your spiritual heart, to let God see you for who you are. And then when you open yourself up to the creator of the universe, take time to do that. And really understand that you can have a personal relationship with the creator, and don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of those moments where you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to say, hey, here I am, and I'm not very good. And I'm filled with all sorts of imperfections. You're not ever going to be where you're supposed to be to come in front of the Lord God Almighty. I mean, you don't think you can clean yourself up he loves you as you are. Mm-hmm. And Christ came to forgive your sin. And by the way, everybody you're going to coach and everybody you're going to coach with and every human being you're going to come in contact with has that in common. And once you let go and let him heal your heart and let him make you whole, you are going to be your authentic self, who God designed you to be. And then you let go of all the pretense and let go of all the expectation and let him do what he wants to do with your life. And that, that's not an easy thing. That's surrendering. That's come follow me. Take up your cross daily. And I mean, that's what Jesus is talking about. Come follow me. And that's my word today. Come. that invitation exists for everybody out there today. Come, follow me. You'll never look back and be disappointed.
Thank you, Coach. For me, first off, thank you for your vulnerability. We're in a profession where we tend to wear masks, and we don't want people to know the emotional side of ourselves, or maybe the ups and downs, and but we need that. We need to know that we're not alone, because these things go through all of our heads. I obviously think very highly of my dad's skill as a coach, and and I know who he is and who he's been because I've played for him. I've watched people work for him, and quite frankly, a lot of probably the last 20 years, his label has not matched who I know he is as a coach. And for me, he always spoke so highly of you and your mind and your ability to coach. And I know you are a fantastic coach, because I know the coach who my dad is, and how his mind thinks. And I know for me, just listening to you walk through the disappointments, and I just know the lies that the enemy has had to been telling you over those years, and your family, and just your perseverance. And then to sit here and listen to you talk about the restoration, and just how you're able to see the Father in a way that you've never been able to see. It just screams to me of the Father's love for you, and for my dad even, and even in my own life. Just to be willing to be patient with taking you through something that probably makes you mad at him at times.
Oh yeah.
But he's taken
yeah.
you by the hand and said, I'm willing for you to be mad at me, because I want to take you to somewhere that I know is the best thing eternally for you, which is to know me. And
Right.
just hearing you speak his truth and his love for us, and even you talked about just the freedom we have, and just there's times that throughout listening to you, I heard things of rest and things of freedom that you're experiencing now, even though your name is not where you probably want it to be in this moment.
Right.
But
Yeah.
for me, I sit and think about, my dad's probably doing the best coaching he's ever done.
Right.
And he's losing a lot of games at times,
Right.
but those kids need coaches too.
That's exactly right.
And, those people in those organizations need really good coaches, because if we're truly in this to draw out the best in people, yes, we do want to win. Yes, we're going to try to put our kids in the best situation, but a good coach can coach in any situation. And I think you model this, and I know my dad models this as well, is just the ability to walk into any situation, take on any label that's going to be attached with that organization, and says, I'm just going to coach, and I'm going to pour myself into this place and draw the best out of them. And I believe when we step into, even though the world might never highlight us the way we would want, I believe there's going to come a time in eternity when we walk in front of the one that does matter. He's going to say, I saw you all that time. And I want to encourage you and know that you followed me when it would have been so much easier to do the other thing and pursue yourself. So Coach, I just, I know I'm blessed from sitting here listening to your wisdom. I know those who come across this will, will be blessed. And I just know our coaching profession need people like you and all these other coaches we keep coming across that are searching for the kingdom and experiencing the kingdom, in the highs and lows of a performance-based world we live in. So thank you, Coach.
I appreciate it very much. And, I think that's what's been a blessing, is that I think that we learn how to, as we follow the Lord, we learn how to be content in much, and content, as Paul said, when we're abased, when we're without, and that's part of his rest that we achieve when we're in.
Austin, you, I think now you know why I'm so excited when I tell you I talked to Coach Spence, because he's a treasure.
Yeah.
And that's what I want you to remember, Rob. You are a treasure to me in our times that we talk, but you're a treasure to this profession. I think of words like the glorious riches of his inheritance. And I often talk to Papa and I'm like, what is that? Well, Rob Spence is that. You're one of the glorious riches of his inheritance. And you made me think of the story that, Austin, you and I were talking about the other day of the woman at the well. And what gave her such great freedom was when she walked away from Jesus. We all know that encounter that happens about, why you here, and can you give me some water, and I'm the living water. But I think we miss sometimes the conversation that happens when she goes back to her people. And this is what she said. And Rob said it in a different way today. She said, he told me everything about my life. Well, we know her life. She had 5 husbands. She was an adulterer. He told me everything about my life, and he never left.
He never left.
He was there with her. And I think of what you said the other night, Austin, he said, Austin threw this out, Rob, and I'd been dwelling on it. He said, what's all of our desires? It's to be completely known and fully accepted. Even though he knows everything about us, which sometimes it isn't good,
right,
we're still fully accepted and we can rest in Papa's love. So what a blessing today has been. And I'm excited that for an hour and 20 minutes, we got to share Rob Spence, who I usually get just on the phone, me and him. And I know that your story is going to be such a blessing to those that listen. And it's been a blessing to us, Rob. And again, I treasure you as one of my close friends. And so, Austin, I want to thank you for sharing your story with our listeners today at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.